The rain fell in a relentless gray sheet, turning the asphalt of the upscale restaurant's parking lot into a black mirror that reflected the indifferent neon glow of the city. Inside the Iron Horse Saloon across the street, the world was warm, loud, and smelled of stale beer, worn leather, and Brotherhood. But for Grizz, the night was about to take a turn. He pushed through the saloon doors, the bell above announcing his return with a dull clang, and headed for his prized Harley, a gleaming beast of chrome and midnight blue paint parked under the weak halo of a street lamp. He'd just run a quick errand for Riker, the club president, and was ready to rejoin the fold. As he approached, something seemed off. A smudge on his fuel tank, right below the polished cap. It was dark, almost black in the dim light, and it marred the perfect finish he spent hours maintaining. He grumbled, pulling a rag from his saddlebag. Probably just grease from some careless valet. He swiped at it, but it didn't smear like grease. It flaked. He leaned closer, the scent of rain mixing with something metallic and vaguely sweet. His breath hitched. It wasn't grease. It was dried blood, and within the dark crimson stain were 3 desperate, tiny letters scratched into the paint with a broken fingernail. S.O.S. Grizz stared, his bear-like frame frozen. The letters were small, frantic, almost illegible. The work of someone terrified, someone who had only a second. He looked across the street at the restaurant, La Vie en Rose, a place where men in $1,000 suits brought women who wore diamonds like armor. A place his kind was meant to service, not patronize. Who had done this? His mind raced. The valet must have parked his bike near a patron's car. Someone getting out or getting in. A woman, judging by the fingernail scratch. A woman close enough to touch his bike, desperate enough to use her own blood to cry for help. A cold fury, sharp and pure, sliced through the warmth of the beer in his belly. This wasn't just vandalism. This was a message in a bottle, thrown into an ocean of indifference, and it had washed up on the shores of the Hells Angels. He didn't wipe the message away. He left it there, a sacred testament to a stranger's terror. He swung his leg over the bike, the engine roaring to life with a guttural explosion that ripped through the quiet patter of the rain. He wasn't going back inside for another beer. He was going back to see Riker. He was bringing the war council a declaration, written in the blood of an innocent. The ride back to the clubhouse was a blur of righteous anger. The wind whipped at his face, but he didn't feel it. All he could see were those 3 letters, a brand seared into his mind. He burst into the clubhouse, the heavy oak doors slamming against the wall. The laughter and roughhousing died instantly. Every eye turned to him. Riker, sitting at the head of the long table, looked up from cleaning his knife, his gaze sharp and questioning. He was a man carved from granite and fury, his arms a roadmap of ink and scars, his eyes holding the weight of 100 battles fought and won. "What is it, Grizz?" Riker's voice was low, a gravelly rumble that commanded silence. Grizz didn't speak. He just jerked his head toward the door. "You need to see this. All of you." The entire chapter followed him out into the rain-slicked yard. They circled his bike like wolves scenting prey. Riker knelt, his powerful frame casting a long shadow. He ran a finger, careful not to touch the message itself, along the edge of the bloody plea. He saw the frantic scratch marks, the desperation in the very way the letters were formed. A muscle in his jaw clenched. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, but in that darkness, he didn't see the rain or his brothers. He saw a different face. His sister, 17 and terrified, her own face bruised, her eyes pleading with him for a help he had been too young, too powerless to give. He had failed her then, a failure that had forged the iron core of his entire existence. He had sworn on her memory that he would never be powerless again. Never again would he stand by while a monster preyed on the weak. He opened his eyes, and the ice in them could have frozen the rain mid-fall. "Find her," he commanded, his voice a low, deadly promise. "Tear this city apart, piece by piece. Find the hand that wrote this." The Brotherhood answered with a collective growl, the sound of engines about to be unleashed. The hunt had begun. The payback was coming. The streets were about to learn what happened when a monster's victim cried out for help, and the Hell's Angels answer the call. The clubhouse transformed from a rowdy bar into a military command center. Maps of the city were spread across the scarred wooden tables. Laptops glowed with satellite images, and the air crackled with a focused, predatory energy. The first step was identifying the source. La Vie en Rose, Grizz repeated, pointing to a spot on the map. Valet parking only. My bike was parked in their spillover lot, right next to the main entrance for the staff and deliveries. Riker absorbed the information, his mind a steel trap of logistics and strategy. The valet. He's our first link. Rook, you're clean-cut enough. Go talk to him. Don't spook him. You're just a guy who left a tip in his car. Want to make sure the right guy got it. Get a name, a schedule, anything. Rook, a prospect eager to earn his patch, nodded sharply. On it, Prez. Riker then turned to the others. The rest of us, we pull the restaurant's public profile. Owner, investors, regular clientele. We're looking for a needle in a haystack, brothers. A man with a reputation. A man who likes to hurt women and has the money to cover it up. While Rook went to charm the valet, the others dug. They cross-referenced names of the city's elite with whispers from their network of informants. Bartenders, bouncers, women who worked in the shadows and saw everything. Hours bled into one another. The smell of stale coffee replaced the smell of beer. The initial rage simmered into a low, burning fire of purpose. It was late into the night when Rook returned, his face grim. Got it, he said, tossing a valet ticket onto the table. The kid, Miguel, was scared, but he talked. Said there's one guy everyone's afraid of. Donovan Cade. A collective stillness fell over the room. The name was poison. Donovan Cade wasn't just rich, he was untouchable. He owned a logistics empire that was a known front for smuggling and worse. He had judges in his pocket and a private security team made of ex-special forces mercenaries. He was a ghost, a predator who moved in the highest circles, leaving a trail of broken people who were too terrified to ever speak his name. Cade, Riker breathed, the name tasting like ash. He was there tonight. A regular. Always comes with the same woman. Miguel said she's beautiful, but she looks like a ghost. Never smiles, never looks anyone in the eye. Always has a bruise hidden under a silk scarf or long sleeves. Even in summer, the pieces clicked into place with horrifying certainty. He said tonight Cade caused a scene inside. A waiter spilled wine on her dress. Cade didn't yell. He just smiled, a smile that made the whole staff freeze. He dragged her out to his car. A black armored sedan. That's when Miguel moved my bike to make room. Her side of the car would have been right next to Grizz's tank. Grizz slammed his fist on the table, the wood groaning in protest. That was her chance. A few seconds while he was distracted, Riker pulled up a file on Cade, the screen illuminating his face. Handsome, chiseled with cold, empty eyes that held a chilling blend of charm and cruelty. The file listed his primary residence, a sprawling, fortified mansion on the cliffs overlooking the ocean, a fortress designed for privacy and isolation. That's where he has her, Riker said, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every man there. He saw the same cold fire he felt in his own gut. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was a reckoning. Donovan Cade was a cancer, and they were the cure. He thought of his sister, Anya, again. Her abuser had been a small-time thug, a bully who thought his fists made him a king. Cade was a different breed of monster, one with power and influence, one who believed he was a god. The principle, however, was the same. Men who hurt women deserve to be broken. Riker remembered the day he found Anya, curled in the corner of her room, her spirit shattered. He had been a teenager then, full of impotent rage. He had gone after the man, of course, with nothing but fury and a stolen pipe wrench. He'd ended up in juvenile hall, and the man had walked away with a few broken bones and a restraining order. The system had protected the monster. It was the day Riker realized that true justice didn't come from a courtroom. It came from the Brotherhood. It came from men willing to draw a line in the sand and punish those who dared to cross it. He thinks his money and his walls can protect him, Riker said to his men, his voice resonating with years of suppressed pain and unyielding conviction. He's about to find out that there are no walls high enough to keep us out. We're going to knock on his door, and we're going to drag his soul out into the light. The plan began to form, not with reckless abandon, but with the cold, calculating precision of a military operation. They weren't just going to save a woman. They were going to dismantle a monster's kingdom, stone by bloody stone. Inside the sterile, silent opulence of Donovan Cade's mansion, Isla moved like a phantom. The house wasn't a home. It was a gilded cage, a museum of her own personal hell. Every surface was polished marble or gleaming glass, reflecting a distorted version of herself, a woman with haunted eyes and a soul worn thin. She traced the faint, healing cut on her finger, the source of the blood she had used to write her desperate plea. The memory was a flash of pure, adrenaline-fueled terror. Cade had been berating the valet, his voice a low, venomous hiss, his back turned to her for no more than 5 seconds. It was the longest she had been unobserved in months. Her eyes had fallen on the motorcycle parked beside them, a symbol of everything she had lost. Freedom, the open road, the wind in her hair. It was a wild, untamed thing in a world of curated perfection. In that split second, a primal instinct for survival she thought had long been extinguished flared to life. She dug a broken nail into the soft flesh of her finger, the sharp pain a grounding shock. With trembling haste, she'd smeared the 3 letters onto the cool metal of the fuel tank. S.O.S, a prayer whispered into the void. Then Cade had turned, his cold eyes locking onto hers, and the moment was gone. He hadn't seen. The hope that had ignited within her immediately began to flicker, threatened by the suffocating reality of her life. Now, days later, it was nearly dead. What were the chances? That the owner was not just some weekend warrior, but someone who would understand? That he would even notice? That he would care? The odds were infinitesimal. Her life with Cade was a masterclass in psychological torture. He never raised his voice in public. He was all quiet smiles and possessive touches that felt like brands. But behind the closed doors of their fortress, he was a demon. He controlled everything. What she ate, what she wore, who she spoke to. Her phone was monitored, her internet access restricted. The staff were either too terrified of him or too well paid to intervene. They saw the bruises she so carefully concealed, the flinches she couldn't control, and they looked away. Tonight was worse. He had been on edge for days, pacing his office, taking hushed, angry calls. His paranoia, always simmering, was beginning to boil. He had accused her of looking at a waiter for too long at dinner. Her punishment had been swift and silent, his hand gripping her arm with bruising force, his face inches from hers, whispering threats that made her blood run cold. "You are mine, Isla," he had breathed, his tone deceptively soft. "A beautiful piece in my collection. And pieces don't have thoughts. They don't have desires. They only have an owner. Don't ever forget that." He was standing by the vast floor-to-ceiling window now, staring out at the turbulent ocean, a glass of expensive scotch in his hand. The storm outside mirrored the one inside her. "You seem distracted tonight," he said, not turning around. His ability to sense her moods was another one of his cruel talents. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs. She smoothed down her silk dress, her hands trembling slightly. "I'm just tired, Donovan, tired." He turned, and the smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. It was a predator's smile. "Or are you dreaming of something?" "Someone." He walked toward her, his steps slow, deliberate. Each footfall on the marble floor was a drumbeat of dread. He stopped in front of her, so close she could smell the scotch on his breath. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing her jawline before gripping her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "There is nothing for you out there, my love. Nothing but a world that will chew you up and spit you out. I am your sanctuary. I am your salvation. Everything you need is right here." His thumb pressed into the faint bruise on her cheek, and she flinched. His smile widened. "See? You are safe here." Protected, he was wrong. This wasn't protection. It was a slow, agonizing execution of the soul. But as he stood there, basking in his absolute power over her, a faint sound reached her ears, almost imperceptible under the howl of the wind and the crashing waves. It was a low, distant rumble, a vibration that seemed to travel through the very foundation of the house. It sounded like thunder, but it was rhythmic, steady, and growing closer. It was the sound of approaching engines. Dozens of them. Hope, treacherous and terrifying, ignited in her chest once more, a tiny, defiant flame refusing to be extinguished. Could it be? Could her prayer into the void have actually been heard? She held her breath, her eyes locked on Cade's, praying he didn't hear it, praying he wouldn't see the flicker of life in her gaze. The storm was coming, but it might not be the one outside the window. The surveillance had been meticulous, a masterwork of patience and predatory focus. For 3 days, shifts of Hell's Angels had watched Cade's fortress from a vantage point high in the wooded hills above the property. They used long-range optics, thermal imaging, and a high-gain microphone to map the life within those walls. They documented every patrol of Cade's mercenary security, every delivery truck, every shift change. They learned the dead zones in the camera coverage, the 10-second delay in the infrared tripwires, the precise moment the night guard took his smoke break. Grizz, a surprisingly patient observer, spent hours sketching the layout of the grounds. Rook, using his tech skills, intercepted wireless signals, building a digital blueprint of the internal security network. They were ghosts, gathering intelligence, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. During one long, cold night of observation, Riker sat with Grizz, the two of them sharing a thermos of black coffee. The wind whistled through the pines around them, a mournful sound. "He's got her locked in there tight," Grizz murmured as I pressed the spotting scope. "She only comes out on the terrace for a few minutes a day." Always with him, Riker didn't answer for a moment, his gaze lost in the sprawling estate below. The pinpricks of light in the mansion seemed to mock him. "Men like Cade," he finally said, his voice a low growl, "they don't build fortresses to keep people out. They build them to keep people in. Their prisons disguised as palaces." He took a sip of coffee, the bitter liquid doing little to warm the cold knot in his stomach. "My sister, Anya. Her prison was a 2-bedroom apartment with a deadbolt. The walls were thinner, but they were just as high." Grizz turned from the scope, his expression softening. He was one of the few who knew the full story. "You were just a kid, Riker. I was old enough to see what was happening," Riker countered, his voice raw. Old enough to see the fear in her eyes, the way she flinched when he walked into a room. "I told her to leave. I begged her. But he had her so twisted up, she thought she deserved it. She thought it was love." He crushed the paper cup in his hand. "By the time I was big enough to do something about it, to really do something, it was too late." He broke her spirit. The bastard walked away, and a part of her never came back from that apartment. He looked at Grizz, his eyes burning with an intensity that was almost painful to behold. "That's what Cade is doing to her down there. Every second we wait, he's chipping away another piece of her soul. We're not just getting her out, Grizz. We're giving her back a life that he's trying to steal." Their opportunity came from an unexpected source. A tip from their network led them to a disgruntled former security tech who had been fired by Cade for a minor infraction. For a case of top-shelf whiskey and the promise that his name would never be mentioned, the tech gave them the Holy Grail: the master override codes for the entire security system, set to expire in 48 hours. It's a fail-safe Cade had installed, the tech had explained, his hands shaking. In case of a system malfunction, it gives a 90-second window where everything goes dark. No cameras, no sensors, no alarms. He changes the codes every week. The ticking clock was now deafening. They had one shot. The plan was finalized in the clubhouse, the mood sober and determined. It would be a 2-pronged assault. Team Alpha, led by Riker, would be the spearhead. They would use the 90-second window to breach the perimeter and neutralize the external guards. Team Bravo, led by Grizz, would follow, securing the extraction route and providing cover. Rook would be their eye in the sky, running comms and monitoring the security feed from a van parked a mile away. "We go in fast, we go in quiet," Riker instructed, his finger tracing the path on the blueprints. "Alpha Team hits the guardhouse here and the main power conduit here. Bravo secures the south gate. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. We want them neutralized, not dead. The chaos is our cover. He looked at each man. Cade is the target. Isla is the objective. Get her out no matter what. If things go sideways, you get her to the south gate. Grizz will get her clear. Is that understood? A chorus of low, affirmative grunts was his answer. Tonight, Riker declared, we remind the monsters of this city that they are not gods. They are prey, and we are the hunters. As they suited up, checking their gear, the familiar ritual settled their nerves. The click of a magazine, the zip of a leather jacket, the low murmur of brothers preparing for battle. Riker paused, catching his reflection in the polished chrome of a bike. He saw the fury in his own eyes, but underneath it, he saw the face of the powerless boy he once was. Tonight, that boy would finally get his justice. Tonight, for Anya, and for the nameless woman in the tower, the Hell's Angels would ride. The rumble that Isla had heard was not thunder. It was the sound of fate arriving on two wheels. A mile from the estate, the convoy of motorcycles cut their engines, coasting the final stretch in an eerie silence broken only by the crunch of gravel under their tires. They were a pack of leather-clad wraiths melting into the stormy darkness. In the comms van, Rook's face was illuminated by the glow of multiple screens. Systems are live. I have the override sequence ready. You have 90 seconds from the moment I say go. Clock is ticking. Prez, Riker, crouched with Team Alpha at the perimeter fence, gave a single, sharp nod, his knuckles white where he gripped a pair of bolt cutters. Stand by, Rook. On my mark, down at the south gate, Grizz and Team Bravo moved into position, shadows detaching themselves from deeper shadows. The air was thick with anticipation, a tangible thing that tasted of salt and ozone. Inside the mansion, Kate had finally heard it too. A frown creased his perfect forehead. He walked back to the window, peering out into the maelstrom. What is that noise? It's just the storm, Donovan, Isla said, her voice a carefully controlled whisper, but her heart was a wild bird beating against the cage of her ribs. No, he said, his eyes narrowing. That's not the storm. He turned from the window and strode toward a sleek, wall-mounted panel. His hand hovered over the security interface. I'm putting the grounds on full lockdown. In the van, Rook saw the alert flash across his screen. He's going for the lockdown protocol. Riker, you have to go now. If he hits that button, the override is useless. Now, Rook, do it now. Riker roared into his mic, go, go, go. Rook's fingers flew across the keyboard. Override engaged. The clock is running. 90 seconds. Simultaneously, the lights in Cade's mansion flickered and died, plunging the opulent rooms into absolute darkness. The hum of the climate control, the glow of the security panel, everything went silent. Cade swore, fumbling in the dark. What the hell? On the grounds, it was a perfectly synchronized ballet of violence. Riker sliced through the fence chain as two of his men swarmed the main guardhouse. The guards, blinded by the sudden power outage and confused, were taken down with brutal, silent efficiency. No alarm sounded. No shots were fired. Another team sprinted toward the main power conduit, planting a small charge that would keep the primary grid offline indefinitely. 30 seconds left. Rook's voice was tense in their ears. Riker and his team were through the breach and moving across the manicured lawn, using the ornamental hedges as cover. They moved with a fluid grace that defied their size, phantoms in the night. At the south gate, Grizz's team overpowered the two guards there, securing the escape route. Bravo is in position. Gate is ours, Grizz reported, his voice calm and steady. 60 seconds. Back in the mansion, Kate had found a flashlight. Its powerful beam cut through the darkness, catching Isla's wide, terrified eyes. The fear he saw there was different now. It wasn't just fear of him. It was anticipation. You, he hissed, the realization dawning on him. You did this. Somehow, you did this. He lunged for her. But at that exact moment, the reinforced French doors leading to the terrace exploded inward. Glass and wood sprayed across the marble floor as three massive figures, clad in black leather and tactical gear, filled the doorway. In the center stood Riker, a specter of vengeance silhouetted against the raging storm. His face was a mask of cold fury, his eyes, even in the dim light, burning with a righteous fire. "Time's up," Rook yelled. 90 seconds are over. Alarms are hot again. But it was too late. The wolves were inside the henhouse. The mansion's backup generator kicked in with a roar, and the emergency lights bathed the scene in a stark, sterile glow. Cade stared, momentarily stunned, at the impossible invasion. His private army, his million-dollar security, all defeated in minutes. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded, trying to project an authority his trembling hands betrayed. Riker took a slow step into the room, his boots crunching on the shattered glass. He ignored Cade completely, his gaze fixed on Isla, who was huddled near the wall. He saw the faint bruise on her cheek, the terror in her eyes, and the tiny, defiant spark of hope she was trying to hide. He saw his sister. "We're the guys who answer when someone calls for help," Riker said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. He finally turned his eyes to Cade, and the sheer, unadulterated hatred in his look made the powerful man take an involuntary step back. "Your collection days are over, Cade. We're here for her." Donovan Cade, a man who had built an empire on fear and control, found himself in a situation he couldn't comprehend. His fortress had been breached, his authority challenged by men who looked like they had clawed their way out of the earth itself. His shock quickly curdled into incandescent rage. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," Cade snarled, his voice regaining some of its venom. He subtly reached for a panic button hidden beneath the lip of a nearby mahogany desk. "My men will be here in seconds. They'll tear you apart, your men are." "Occupied," Riker said with a chilling smile that didn't touch his eyes. He took another step forward, flanked by two of his largest enforcers. "As for who you're dealing with, let's just say we're a customer service complaint, here to address a serious issue of product mistreatment." He nodded toward Isla. "Now, step away from the lady." Slowly, instead, Cade's fingers found the button. He pressed it. Nothing happened. The silent, dead response was more terrifying than any alarm. His last bastion of control was gone. Panic began to fray the edges of his composure. "She belongs to me," he shrieked, his facade of sophistication shattering like the glass at his feet. He made a desperate, foolish lunge, not at the bikers, but at Isla, trying to grab her, to use her as a shield. It was the last mistake he would ever make. Riker moved with the explosive speed of a striking cobra. He covered the distance between them in 2 long strides, his arms shooting out and catching Cade by the throat. He lifted the smaller man off his feet, slamming him against the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Cade gasped, his feet dangling uselessly, his hands clawing at the iron grip around his neck. "Grizz," Riker commanded, his voice tight with controlled fury, never taking his eyes off Cade. "Get her out of here." Now Grizz was already moving. He approached Isla gently, his massive form a stark contrast to his soft demeanor. "Come on, darling. It's all right. We're getting you out." Isla flinched at his approach, a conditioned response to any man coming near her. Grizz stopped, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Hey, look at me. We're the good guys. I promise." He unzipped his leather vest and draped it over her shoulders. It was heavy, warm, and smelled of leather, engine oil, and rain. It was the most comforting thing she had felt in years. She looked from his kind, weathered face to Riker, who was holding her tormentor against the wall like a child's doll. For the first time, she saw Cade for what he truly was, not a god, but a small, pathetic man, choking and sputtering, stripped of his power. A tear slid down her cheek, not of fear, but of profound, earth-shattering relief. She let Grizz gently guide her toward the broken doors. As they left, Cade, in a final act of defiance, managed to rasp out, "You'll pay for this. All of you. I own this city." Riker leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for Cade. "You don't own anything anymore. You see, men like you think your money makes you invincible. But there's a different kind of currency out on the street. It's called respect. And you, my friend, are bankrupt." He tightened his grip, watching the fight drain from Cade's eyes. This is for every woman you've ever hurt. Every soul you've ever tried to crush. This is for the S.O.S. You were too arrogant to think anyone would answer. He didn't kill him. That would have been too easy, too quick. Instead, he slammed Cade's head against the wall one last time, a sharp, cracking sound echoing in the room. Cade slumped to the floor, unconscious, a broken puppet with its strings cut. Riker stood over him, his chest heaving. The rage that had driven him for days was finally receding, leaving behind a cold, clear sense of purpose. He could hear the roar of Grizz's Harley outside, carrying Isla away to safety. The first part of the mission was complete. Now came the second, ensuring Donovan Cade could never rebuild his kingdom of pain. Riker keyed his mic. "Rook, you recording?" Every second, Prez came to reply. Got crystal clear audio of his threats and his confession that she belongs to him. "Good," Riker said. He turned to his men. "Let's clean up. We're not done here." They moved through the mansion with practiced efficiency. They weren't thieves. They didn't touch the art or the expensive trinkets. They were looking for something far more valuable: leverage. In Cade's office, they found it. A hidden safe containing ledgers, hard drives, and documents detailing his entire criminal enterprise. Names, dates, shipments. It was the Rosetta Stone of his empire. "Looks like Mr. Cade's associates are about to have a very bad day." One of the bikers chuckled, holding up a drive. Riker took the drive. This was true justice. Not just breaking the man, but erasing his legacy of fear. They left Cade unconscious on his marble floor, surrounded by the ruins of his perfect, violent world. As they walked out of the mansion and into the storm, Riker felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he had been carrying for over a decade. He hadn't been able to save Anya, but tonight he had saved Isla, and in doing so, he had saved a piece of himself. The engines roared to life, a triumphant chorus against the storm. They had come as hunters, and they left as saviors, melting back into the night from which they came, leaving a trail of righteous destruction in their wake. The journey away from the mansion was a surreal blur for Isla. She clung to Grizz's broad back, the roar of the Harley's engine a deafening, beautiful symphony of liberation. The cold, biting wind whipped tears from her eyes, but for the first time in years, they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release. Each mile they covered was another shackle breaking, another bar of her cage dissolving into the night. Grizz drove with a steady, protective confidence, his body shielding her from the worst of the storm. They didn't speak. No words were necessary. The thunder of the engine said everything. They arrived at the clubhouse, a place that from the outside looked intimidating and rough, but as Grizz led her through the doors, it felt like the safest place on earth. The men inside, who had seemed like monsters at Cade's mansion, now looked like guardians. They parted for her respectfully, their expressions a mixture of concern and grim satisfaction. A woman with kind eyes and a patch that read "Mama Bear" on her vest immediately came to her side, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders and guiding her to a comfortable chair by a crackling fireplace. "You're safe now, honey," the woman said, her voice gentle. "My name's Sadie. Can I get you anything?" "There, coffee." Isla could only nod, overwhelmed. She had forgotten what simple, unconditional kindness felt like. She sat by the fire, Grizz's heavy leather vest still draped over her, clutching a warm mug of tea as if it were a life raft. She watched the bikers, her saviors, as they moved around the room. They were loud, rough, and unpolished, but there was an undeniable bond between them, a fierce loyalty that was the complete antithesis of Cade's possessive, isolating control. This was a family. When Riker and the rest of the team returned, a quiet cheer went through the room. Riker's eyes immediately found Isla. He walked over, his expression unreadable, and knelt in front of her chair. He was an intimidating man, covered in tattoos and radiating power. Yet as he looked at her, his eyes held a surprising softness. "Isla," he said, his voice a low rumble. "That's your name, isn't it? We found your driver's license in a drawer." She nodded, finding her voice for the first time. "Yes." It came out as a hoarse whisper. Thank you, she said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. How did you? How did you know? Riker reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a high-resolution photograph of Grizz's fuel tank, the 3 bloody letters stark and clear. You sent out a signal, he said simply. We just happened to be the ones listening. He saw the exhaustion and trauma etched on her face, but he also saw the unyielding steel in her spine. The same resilience he had seen in his sister. Cade can't hurt you anymore, he promised. We took everything from him. His empire is going to crumble. We've already sent anonymous packages to the FBI, the DEA, and a few of his more volatile business rivals. By the time he wakes up, his whole world will be on fire. And he'll have no one to blame but himself. The justice was absolute, and it was beautiful. It wasn't just revenge, it was eradication. They hadn't just saved her. They had ensured he could never create another victim. Over the next few days, the clubhouse became Isla's sanctuary. Sadie became her confidant, helping her through the initial waves of shock and fear. The bikers, for all their rough edges, treated her with a fierce, almost sacred respect. They gave her space when she needed it and provided a comforting presence when the silence became too much. Grizz would sit with her for hours, not saying much, just cleaning his bike parts and offering a quiet solidarity that spoke volumes. Rook helped her set up a new, untraceable phone and laptop, giving her back a connection to the world that Cade had stolen. She learned to sleep through the night again without fear, the distant rumble of Harleys a comforting lullaby rather than a source of terror. One evening, she found Riker alone in the garage, staring at an old, framed photograph on his workbench. It was of a smiling teenage girl with the same piercing eyes as him. That's Anya, he said without turning, as if sensing her presence. My sister. He finally looked at Isla, and for the first time, she saw the deep well of pain behind his hardened exterior. A man like Cade. He took her light. I was too young, too weak to stop him. I've spent my whole life making sure I would never be weak again. You're not weak, Isla said softly, stepping closer. You're the strongest person I've ever met. You saved me. Riker. You saved yourself. Isla, he corrected her gently. You wrote those letters. You took that chance. All we did was answer the call. He looked from the photo of Anya to Isla, and a subtle shift occurred in his expression. The haunted look was still there, but it was softer now, tempered by a sense of peace. The wound was still there, but it was no longer gaping. In saving her, he had finally, in some small way, managed to forgive himself. He hadn't been able to save his sister, but he had honored her memory in the most powerful way imaginable. He had given another woman back her future. The Hell's Angels had given her a safe harbor, but it was Isla who had to learn to sail her own ship again. And with the strength she had found in their brotherhood, she knew, for the first time in a long time, that the open sea was hers to conquer.